Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. It is finally time to talk about all of my favorite reads from 2023. And let me tell you, I've been putting this off because I read over 180 books in 2023. I didn't want to go through and think about all the ones that were favorites, but it actually wasn't so hard to come up with a list of 10 adult/YA books and 5 middle grade. 5 I will put in loosely in quotes. And so we're going to talk about them today. I'm going to start with the 5 middle grade, and then I will switch over and do the adult books, ending with my favorite book of the year. And I'm really excited to get into this list. Just looking through actually was really fun. I had a fantastic reading year. At some point in the near future, I'm going to go through kind of a reading recap with you, some stats from the year, some highlights of my reading year. Yeah, just kind of how my reading broke down in different categories. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today is just all about the best of the best. So I'm going to start with middle grade, and for number 5, and I am going to kind of rank them, ending with number 1, which will be my favorite. I'm kind of cheating with number 5. I don't have an exact number of how many middle grade books I read this year, but it's a lot, especially during middle grade March, where I focus mostly on middle grade. I just read a ton of fantastic middle grade. And so for number 5, I'm counting all of the books that I read for the middle grade March book club this year. This is our first year having a book club that lasted throughout the year. We started in May and went all the way through actually until January. We still have one left. And it just was so much fun to connect with middle grade readers throughout the year and not just in March. So Maisie Chen's Last Chance, 3 Strikes Summer, The Miraculous, all of these books, even Ballet Shoes, which I didn't love. It just still was so nice to connect with people. Ogress and the Orphans, like there just were so many fantastic books that we read together, and being able to talk about them with you guys in a live was just a lot of fun. And so I'm counting that experience / all of those books as my number 5 favorite middle grade read. Coming in at number 4, I have this book, Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzer. I had first learned about this one from Amanda at On the Middle Shelf. It's totally an under the radar read, and I finally picked it up this year and absolutely loved it. I really, really loved it. It does take place surrounding the Vietnam War. So it's historical, but we follow these 2 friends, and they find part of a uniform buried near their home, and they go on this mission to try to figure out who it belongs to. And it was very touching. It made me cry, which isn't that hard, but I loved the friendship. I loved the little bit of a mystery and the quest that they were on. And I love that it was set around the Vietnam War rather than World War II. And it definitely talks about some veterans and how they were treated after the war. I just really felt like this was a beautiful story, and I loved it. My 3rd favorite middle grade of the year was Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. I have not yet continued this series. I've only read this first one, but I love a middle grade fantasy series. I just love it. You guys know I'm deep in the depths of Keeper of the Lost Cities, and this is another fantasy series that I just think is going to be fantastic. We follow Amari. She's our main character, and she has to go on a hunt. Her brother goes missing, and she didn't really know that magic was a part of her world until just finds some clues about her brothers and ends up traveling to this other world. She ends up getting a chance to enter this magical competition against people who've known about magic their whole lives, but she is determined to figure out what happened to her brother, and we just follow her on that journey. I really love it. I just think it was creative and captivating. I was on the edge of my seat wanting to know what was going to happen next. And I love a creative middle grade fantasy series. Love, love, love. Definitely planning on reading the next one and more when they come out. My 2nd favorite middle grade book of 2023 was Forever or a Long, Long Time by Kayla Carter. I read this one when I read like Chantel reads all day, and I know that she highly, highly praises this one, and I absolutely loved it as well. I feel like this gave such a realistic, which means that it was heartbreaking at times, a realistic picture of foster care and adoption. So we follow these 2 young kids who had spent a lot of time in foster care, and now they have been adopted. But that doesn't mean that all of those feelings of rejection and loneliness and all of the trauma that they had experienced both from leaving their birth family and then being in foster care. Like, they don't even remember a lot of it. And then also just the difficulty in accepting the fact that this is their forever family. And so we follow this brother and sister, and as they kind of learn more, as they go back and kind of try to find these memories that they have buried, and as their adoptive mom kind of walks through this process with them, it felt so realistic that it was heartbreaking at times. It was so filled with hope, though, at the same time. It just was beautiful. It was so beautifully done. It was so beautifully done. My second favorite of the year. Wonderful, wonderful book. And then my favorite middle grade book of 2023 is The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh. I absolutely loved this book. This is a historical fiction and dual timelines. We follow this young boy. His great grandmother is moved in with his family during the pandemic. And as a punishment for middle school behaviors, at one point his mom says that he has to help his great grandmother go through some of these boxes that are in her room, help her organize and figure out what she's going to keep and all that stuff. And in the process, he starts to get to know his great grandmother and her history. And then in the past timeline, we learn about the Ukraine and this deadly famine that happened in the Ukraine that I had never heard about before. So we learn about great grandmother and two other girls that were in the Ukraine at the time, and we learn their story, and it was so interesting. I loved the grandmother-grandson relationship that developed as the story went on. I loved the portrayal of COVID. I mean, we're going to start seeing that, I think, more and more and more in books, and it's not always done well, but I felt like this was realistic. His bubble had to be very small because of his Gigi living with them, whereas he had some friends who were allowed to ride around the block and kind of play outside in their backyard a little bit more than he was. And so it felt realistic to what we all experienced during the pandemic. I thought it was done really well. And obviously the historical side of things, that's my heart. I love historical fiction, and I absolutely loved the historical timeline as well. But I just thought all around this was beautifully written, beautifully told. I absolutely, absolutely loved it. And I'm so glad that is my favorite middle grade book of the year. Yay. Okay, now we're going to switch gears and talk about adult/YA. I have a couple YA books on here as well. I also may have like snuck a couple extras in. You'll see when we get to them. But I'm going to start with number 10, which is 2 nonfiction books. I didn't read a ton of nonfiction, and if you asked me tomorrow, I might rank my nonfiction differently. But when I just sat down today, these are the 2 nonfiction that stood out to me. So I have Book Love by Debbie Tung. This is a comic collection of reader problems and bookish comics. Like, it just was so lovely and relatable and funny at parts, and yep, that's me at parts. Like, I just really, really loved this. And then just recently in December, I read Same Kind of Different as Me by Ron Hall and Denver Moore. I thought this was a fabulous memoir of friendship of 2 men from different backgrounds and different races and different cultures right here in the United States, becoming friends and learning so much from each other. I loved the humility with which it was written. I loved the honesty and how struggles and biases and prejudices were not covered over or excused, that it just was all a part of the story. And I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Same Kind of Different as Me. It's an older one, but I'm finally getting around to it. Then for number 9, I have a short story. I originally thought I was going to try to read a ton of short stories in 2023. That did not happen. But there is one that I read that I keep thinking about. It pops up in my mind every once in a while, and I'm just like, well, that was a really good one. And that is Address Unknown by Catherine Cushman. This story was written during World War II, about World War II. So it's not historical fiction in that it was written now about the past. It was written during the time period that it talks about. So it was contemporary for its time. We follow at the beginning, 2 college students, roommates, I think they were in college, or friends. One of them is German, one's American, and the German boy ends up going back home to Germany, and they continue their correspondence, and it just is epistolary. We follow their journey into World War II based on their letters, and let me tell you, I was not prepared for the ending of it. And I'm not going to say anything more than that because it is a short story, but I just thought it was interesting because it wasn't written now looking back. It was written during the time period. So it was written in like 1940 something. So holy moly, fantastic little short story. Yeah, I can't stop thinking about it. Then the next two that I have, 8 and 7, I put on this list, number one, because I love them, but also because they have in common the fact that there's a character or a narrator, a character in one and a narrator in the other that is obscure. Like, so for example, number 8 is The Little Liar by Mitch Albom, another book that I read in December. This one is narrated by Truth, which I just thought was so unique. I thought the whole setup of this book was actually pretty unique. So Truth is the narrator. We follow 4 different characters. A little boy who is known for telling the truth, always. His older brother, who always feels like everybody loves the little brother a little bit better. A friend of theirs, little mini sort of love, not like severe love triangle, but a friend of theirs who has a crush on the truth teller, but the older brother has a crush on her when they're kids, right? So we follow her through the years, and also a Nazi officer. We follow these 4 characters from the beginning of World War II and then all the way through at different points of time. And I just thought the structure was super unique. I thought the story was fantastic. The impact of a lie on the little boy's life when he is kind of forced to tell lies, but he thinks he's telling the truth. And when he realizes that they were lies, how that impacts and completely changes the trajectory of his life. We do see from inside Auschwitz and outside of it. And it just was a unique way to tell a story. And I was here for it. The other one that has something like a similar kind of interesting facet of how the story was told was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Kuto. I absolutely love this cover. And this book takes place in Syria. And we follow a young girl who's training to become a physician when fighting and cries for freedom kind of broke out in Syria. And people are deciding, are they going to stay and fight for their country, or are they going to leave? And this is a huge struggle for this young woman to decide what she's going to do. But there is a character in here who is ultimately a portrayal of her fear. It is somebody like almost like her conscience speaking to her and helping her and trying to get her to decide a certain way. The struggle is very real for her. Is she going to stay and continue to help people in her country, or is she gonna leave? And I thought it was fantastic, so emotional, and again about a part of the world that I don't know a ton about. And I just really loved this. This is YA, and there was a little bit of that angst, but the angst felt realistic and appropriate because of the situation that this young woman was in. So absolutely loved this book. Fabulous read. On a much lighter note, I'm going to put The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer on this list because I just really remember this fondly. So this is going to be number 6 on my list. I liked a lot about this story. This was a very bookish book. In it, we follow a reclusive author who has not written the next book in his series in a really long time. But then he does write the next book, and he invites a certain group of people to come to the island where he lives, Clock Island, to have an opportunity to win the book the next book in this series that he has written. I loved the whimsicalness of the island itself and the kind of Willy Wonka feel of the story. The invitation to come, there were some puzzles involved and clues and games that they had to play in order to get to the next step. There were conditions of what would keep them on the island or what would be something that would force them to kind of be disqualified. And we follow a handful of characters, including Lucy, who is a young teacher's aide in a school who's trying to raise money so that she might have an opportunity to take care of a little boy who's in a really tough situation at her school. There's a little bit of unbelievability, I guess, like in the story itself, and this wouldn't really happen in real life, but I was here for it. I was here for the story. I was here for that little whimsical side of things. I loved the relationships that were formed. I loved learning about our main guy, the author, and his story and his backstory and why did he become a recluse. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. So it's one that I've thought about a few times off and on throughout the year. So I'm putting it on the list. Number 5 is another one that I just read in December, and I don't know where I put it already. I can't find it. But it's Love and Sephron by Kim Fay. I think this is just a book that came at the right time. I do think it's a wonderful book, and I think it does deserve a place on my top 10. But I think in part that's because it just hit me at just the right time. It's a beautiful story of friendship between two women, and they just begin this correspondence that turns into a really deep friendship. They share recipes with each other. They share their life with each other. There's some really difficult situations that pop up that they address with each other, and it just had me tearing up at the end. It had me on the edge of my seat at one point, like, oh no, what is going to happen next? And it's a short, little tiny epistolary novel. I love epistolary books, and definitely this was a favorite of the year. Number 4 and number 3 are 2 historical fiction that stand out to me in 2023. So at number 4, I have A Girl Called Samson by Amy Harmon. I really love Amy Harmon. There have been 1 or 2 that I didn't love, but for the most part, if Amy Harmon writes it, I want to read it. I'm always going to give it a chance because I have given so many of her books 5 stars. And A Girl Called Samson was just a fantastic read set during the Revolutionary War here in the United States. We follow Deborah Samson, who was a real person. She wanted to do her part in the war, and so she dressed like a boy and joined the army. And that really happened. There's a wonderful romance in here. There's some battle scenes. I was just very caught up in Deborah's story. I think Amy Harmon just does a good job of telling the story and making it believable and realistic. I love the author's note always in learning what was a little bit real and what was changed or adapted to fit the story that she wanted to tell. There were some side characters that were really funny. It was just fabulous. A fabulous historical fiction. Absolutely loved it. Number 3 on my list is The House is on Fire by Rachel Beanland. This was another really great historical fiction set here in Richmond, Virginia. In the early 1800s, there was a theater fire, and it was like a major event in the world at that time. And in this story, we follow a couple different characters, 4 or 5, I can't remember, leading up to the evening at the theater and then following and where they were during the fire. How did they help? How did they not help? One of the characters was a Black man who came back to the theater and was helping people escape, including white people, which just was unheard of at the time. One of the storylines is from a young boy who works on the theater side of things. Like, he wasn't in the play, but he worked behind the scenes. So we see like how the fire even got started and why did it blow up so quickly. We get just kind of a full surround sound almost picture of what happened that night, and through the lens of these few characters in the story. I just thought it was so well told, so interesting. There was not one storyline that I was more interested in the others. All of them captured my attention. I just think Rachel Beanland did a fantastic job, and I really loved this one. For number 2, I have my second little cheat here. My second favorite book of the year was Drowning by TJ Newman, but I'm putting Falling in here too because I really loved both of them so much. But Drowning I liked just a tiny bit better, so technically this is my number 2, but I would recommend both of them. Yeah, they're both airplane stories. They're both really, really, really like edge of your seat, interesting. You can't put it down once you start because you just need to know what happens. And what I love about TJ Newman's writing is that she really makes me feel emotionally connected to the characters, to the people involved. I won't talk about Falling, just know that I also highly recommend it. But in Drowning, we follow an airplane who shortly after taking off has a malfunction, crashes into the ocean, And what everybody's reaction to that is. Some people, the slides open up and some people get out into the water. Some people stay on the plane. We have all kinds of different reactions of passengers. We see what the flight attendants' duties are and how quickly they snap to their jobs. Like it just was captivating to see what was happening and what was going on. On the other side of things is the team who is going to try to rescue any potential survivors. And at first we just don't know if there are going to be any survivors. But the mother, so the husband and the daughter are on the plane. The mother's job is fixing like submarines and the outside of boats. And she's a diver who fixes, like engineer, who fixes boats and other things in the water. And so she finds herself on this team who's going to go and rescue this plane and potentially her husband and daughter. I loved the little glimpses of character development that we got in here. I love that it wasn't just action, 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 but there was some good character development enough that I felt connected to some of these characters. I cried multiple times in a thriller. What? That's just how good TJ Newman is. Yeah, she's fantastic. This book was fantastic. I loved it. And then my final book, my top book of the year, has not changed. If you watched my top 5 books or whatever of the first half of the year, this is still my top book of the year. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It's not a historical, guys. It's not. It's fantasy. Like a humongo fantasy that I just absolutely loved. I loved it so much. And I keep hearing Words of Radiance is even better. Some people say Oathbringer is even better, which is book 3. Like, I'm just really excited to carry on with this series this year. But yeah, Way of Kings is just still my top book of the year. I keep thinking about it. I remember how invested I was when I was reading it. There are 3 main storylines in here, and I really loved all 3 storylines. Kaladin, book boyfriend, I just love him. He's a man of integrity. He's a hard worker. He is a leader, but he's a servant leader. He's like always willing to do what needs to be done. I love him. I love Kaladin so much. But I also love Dalinar, is that his name? And his story with his sons. And he's such a man of integrity too. Like, I love the characters in here, but also the world building is phenomenal. Brandon Sanderson is just brilliant in the way that he weaves in world building with the story. And I felt confused. Not gonna lie, a lot of the time I feel like I could go and read this again and get more out of it, because it's not possible to catch everything, all the little nooks and crannies of the world building and the characters and the story. It's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. I feel like I will know more as I continue on with the series, but I do feel like it's one I could revisit and still gain more about it. But I also didn't feel completely lost. I mean, I did feel a little lost here and there, but I didn't feel really bored at any point, which in a huge book, that's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, it's still my favorite. It's still my favorite of the year. Hopefully, some of the other ones, hopefully I can get to at least Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. Maybe also Rhythm of War. I don't know. Maybe I can finish the series in 2024. They're huge. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So that is my pile of favorites for 2023. I feel like if you ask me again in a week, some of those might be switched out. I really did have a fantastic reading year in 2023. A lot of 5-star, a lot of 4-star, a lot of books that stand out to me. But at this moment in time, those are my top 5 middle grade and top 10-ish adult books. I would love to hear if any of these are also favorites of yours, or if any of them are moving up your TBR because of how I've described them today. Or if you also love them, or if you have a different favorite of the year. I want to hear all the things down in the comments below. Let's chat down there. Thank you so much for watching, and let's hope 2024 is another fantastic reading year. Talk to you soon. Bye.